Welcome, all you citizens of the world. It's time for another edition of Live from the Heartland. I'm Michael James. I'm here in Chicago's blue 49th Ward, and I'm going to bring on a couple of people you all know very well. That would be the co-producers and sometimes hosts, Katy Hogan and Thom Clark. A little bit later, we're going to have Jeff Smith, who's been a longtime activist and now has moved from being a Democrat to being an independent. And before I bring Thom and Katy on here to just do the usual old-fashioned opening up for Live from the Heartland banter, I'm going to throw a few things out there that caught my attention. One is that in Bolivia, there have been blockades and clashes with the police around the country over a couple of weeks now, and at least 200 soldiers are being held hostage by armed supporters of Bolivia's President Evo Morales. Now, that's a former president, and there is some battle going on between Morales and another person from his party about the election. We'll try to fill you in more on that as we know, and if we have anyone down there in Bolivia to give us a report, that will happen, but we're working on it. Closer to home, not related to the election, I've learned that cannabis mega stores in New Buffalo, which is only 70 miles from downtown Chicago, have been recruiting Illinois pot customers with lower prices, a big parking lot, free stuff, and all that. And I think I'll turn it over to Katy and Thom, who've both been in Michigan lately. Do they have any insight or confirmation about the sale of marijuana in Michigan to Illinois residents?
Good supplies that are cheaper. And they honored my Illinois medical dispensary card to boot. So I got all sorts of
Uh-huh.
discounts.
Illinois has a pretty well crafted marijuana legislation. Not that we've really given over the ownership of stores to people who deserve them. There's a lot of big money interest, but we have taxes, we have all kind of fees connected, and I'm wondering how much this will affect the bottom line of the income from tax on marijuana.
So I stopped in a dispensary while I was in Michigan over the last 2 weekends of the campaign because I heard exactly what you're reporting. And given that I have only been in a dispensary two other times, only once in Chicago, I'm not a very experienced pot buyer. But I did I did purchase some pot. It was incredibly cheap. I got a little tin full of gummies that I got because of the name. I have no idea anything else like usual, but I think that the guy in New Buffalo is onto something because we pay way, way more than they do for product if one did go to a dispensary here.
I think it's fair to say that we had well-crafted legislation that did not get implemented very well. Most of the social equity licenses are just now opening up when the white boy national network of cannabis growers and owners have really taken over and dominated. There was a in the weeds story this week about how minority transportation contractors, these are people that would move the product from the farm to the store. You need a special license. Virtually none of the social equity minority owned transportation companies got their licenses in time before, again, the big boy white owned businesses took over all that part of this. So the Illinois rollout has really been flawed, and Michigan has taken advantage of it, to be honest. And I think there is an issue in Michigan about there being too many stores, and we'll see how that shakes out over time. But for the moment, you get off at exit 1, Harbor Road, Harbor Country Road. It used to be called New Buffalo. And there are right there two, not one, but two dispensaries with 15 stations and very friendly staff who know their product and really good prices.
Let
Like
me ask you
gambling
if either of you know,
casinos.
who are some of the big owners of cannabis stores in Illinois. I heard that the governor's family was in on buying some. Is that true?
So on your show, do you just repeat rumors and expect your guests will either confirm the rumor from their single point of view or give you some
I
standing?
thought you two might know. I thought you
Jiminy
might know.
Christmas. Jiminy
I do
Christmas.
not know who the players are, but there are plenty of newsletters online if you want to dig into the business of cannabis. Um, our rollout was not smoothly done. Michigan rolled out a lot more quickly, and they have a lot more growers. And
Wasn't it legal in Michigan way before it was legal here?
no, it was about the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
In
way
fact,
earlier.
Michigan came later. It may
No,
have
Ann
learned from.
Arbor, I remember you could smoke a joint walking down the street in Ann Arbor like years ago,
Well, that
way
was Ann
before
Arbor.
we.
I don't think it was. I may be wrong. Again, I'm not an expert on this, particularly out of
Yeah,
state.
I don't know how Michael engineered us to be talking about
Oh,
this.
they
So
had medical
George,
marijuana earlier than we did, I think. Okay,
okay,
enough on that. I
thank
brought it
you.
up and I'm cutting it off. Um, um, let's go to our mayor, and he was going to have a big new property tax hike, which really PO'd off a lot of people. And all of a sudden now he's backed off of that. Thom, you follow what's going on with our mayor. Well, we all do a little bit. Do you have any comments on where he's at in general and how this rollout of property tax raising came back to bite him?
Well, if the property tax increase was a trial balloon, it was deflated pretty quickly by people across the political spectrum in the city council. And I think one of the interesting dynamics that's unfolding even as we speak, the property tax increase will be voted down this week, and alternative fee increases will come into play, along with maybe some furloughs and layoffs, which the mayor said he didn't want to do. But I think what we're also seeing is the emergence of what structurally should have always been the case in Chicago, a strong city council, weak mayor form of governance. And we'll see how it turns out, because there are all sorts of interesting positive and negative forces coming into play on people taking apart this budget and trying to repackage it. But I think it's fair to say the mayor's original budget, which is often the case with any executive, the budget they propose is often worked over a bit on committee. But Chicago City Council has a reputation for being a rubber stamp, and it's not doing that this time.
Yeah, I'm not as aware as Tom is of the details because my attention has been elsewhere. Which is an interesting just sidetrack thing is that it's really great to be able to think of something other than what I've thought of for 4 months. It's eye-opening. But what I think that
Well, for people who don't know, Katy's been, involved with Operation Swing State for a few months now, and just making trip after trip up to Wisconsin and to Michigan around this election. So she's been resting up a little bit, working on a cold, and kind of coming back to life on other issues.
I've developed that cold rather nicely, fully. It's a full-blown cold. Um, one thing, correcting myself from last week when you engineered us on the radio the morning after this disaster. I don't know how you pulled that off, but it was Tom and I and Don Rose, and it was actually a not bad show. When I
It
listened to
was
it
good.
on the radio, yeah, I realized I had misspoken. I was telling figures, statistics out of the Operation Swing State playbook, and I wasn't looking at any notes, so I was correct in saying we had knocked over 250,000 doors, and then I used the figure 10,000, which were shifts of people on doors, not people, and I used the word volunteers, 10,000 volunteers. That's not correct. We had a lot, but I don't know if anybody's got the number.
One thing you did say, Kate, is that you felt that a number of people when you knocked on their door, they kind of were very nice and they kind of lied through their teeth. That did get some response from some of our listeners, that you were so honest, brutally honest.
That's me, babe. What can I say?
All right, I'm going to go back to Chicago and talking about the city budget. I saw something about recycling. Oh, you have
Can I
something
just
first?
say, the thing that changed, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, what the mayor wanted was a loan for 300, whatever, $1 million, $1 billion, whatever. Not, that wasn't the figure solely addressing or saying that that was the money that was going to be raised from a income tax. Am I wrong?
So
Because I
you're
thought what
wrong.
the council said no to was the loan.
No,
Go ahead.
I think what you're referring to was an earlier issue over the school budget where the mayor wanted to shift money from the city budget to the school budget and have them take out a loan to do that. And that's
Right.
been rejected for the moment, but with the school board in flux, it's not clear that that issue won't come back. The current proposal that the mayor put forward for the city budget did include a $300 million property tax increase, about
Okay.
4% per household. And that has been shot down by the city council. It will be voted down, and a series of other fees and maneuvers will be used, including possibly drawing down more TIF money that hasn't been encumbered. We will certainly see an increase in the monthly garbage fee, which, by the way, at $9.50 a month, only covers about a fifth of the actual cost of picking up our garbage.
Ah,
So
you've changed your tune, Thomas. I remember when we were doing this show together years ago when they first suggested a garbage fee, you were in high dungeon. Do you remember?
uh, meaning opposed to it, or
Yes, yes. You were
I'm
very
sure I
opposed.
was, but I'm talking about the current reality where there's a
I
$9
love it. I love
50
it. Evolution. It's proof of evolution. We need
Well,
that. Anyway.
the fact that it's in place doesn't deal with the equity issues about how much is charged and the usage that various households make of our black bin, blue bin garbage pickup system. But that could take up another whole show.
Yeah.
My general point is that the older people are looking very closely at how we spend our money before they raise more money. And they've definitely decided not to raise the property tax. They're going to look
I
at other
love
ways.
that. I love that too about our current city council. They're brave young things, including our own Maria Hadden, who's exercising leadership in keeping sanity in that body. I think you'd agree with me on that. And
Yes,
then we've got Andre Vasquez. We've got some good people on the serious people who are not going to sell our souls. And I really appreciate that. It's very different from
it's
what
very
we grew
different.
up
And
with.
they're also, like, I remember Helen Schiller, they
Yeah.
know, they're deep down in the budget figures and have a very smart understanding to the extent they've been able to dig the information out, because sometimes that's tough to get out of City Hall, because I'm not
Right.
even sure fifth floor knows entirely the ramifications of everything they're dealing with right now. I mean, Brandon did inherit a mess.
Let me throw back in. I tried to get in there a little bit earlier with recycling and how it relates to the budget. But in general, I think I saw something that Maria hadn't said around recycling or made a move. I find that when my kids were at home, they didn't recycle a lot. They said, well, the word is in Chicago that it does most of the stuff doesn't get recycled. I said, well, we still have to practice it. And so you put the stuff in the recycling bin. But what's your take, either of you, on the status of recycling before we go on to school board, et cetera, et cetera?
It's gone from
Um,
fair to worse in my book. Um, it is true that a lot of what's recycled through the blue bin ends up being landfilled, which was not the purpose. But the whole recycling industry has been in a mess, in part because China's not been buying our old cardboard. That was one of the major revenue sources that kind of kept the rest of the recycling industry going. And we've discovered in recent months that plastic is just not as recyclable as the oil industry has been selling for years and years and years. So there are major challenges with recycling beyond the way the city has run it, but it is an issue. You know, our household, our kids grew up source separating, and now we mingle everything. And I understand the technicalities behind that, but it's there probably won't be many budgetary things around recycling, unfortunately, because there are bigger fish to fry. It
Yeah,
would
and
be
Yeah.
let me
nice.
just add,
Yeah, please.
Chicago is varied in its recycling process because there are different rules and different garbage pickup practices for single homes or buildings up to four is what it used to be for residences from the rest of us who are in multi-residential buildings and pay for our own pickup. And when we pay for our own pickup and we do have a recycling bin that gets picked up from a different garbage can that looks sort of the same, but over the years, I keep asking this question since I've lived here. Has anybody ever followed that truck? Or, how transparent are they? Which, was something we pushed for a while ago. I do think that we wouldn't have to spend a lot of money to do some education. To me, that's free. And the civics teacher in me always wants leadership, whether it's elected or heads of departments in the city who actually know their stuff, to simplify and whiteboard it for all us citizens about what works and what doesn't, and what needs help, and thereby inviting our help.
Right
So
on.
anyway,
Okay, now I'm going to move on to another topic. And there was a lot of hype around the elected school board, and there was a lot of competition and a lot of money that went into it. There were charter school factions, there were public school and Chicago Teachers Union back candidates. Um, all of us, the three of us here, have been involved with a group here in the 49th Ward called Network 49, and Network 49 endorsed Ebony DeBerry, and Ebony did win. Um, Against some stiff competition. Would either of you like to talk about the school board? Anything you'd like to throw in about it in the election?
Well, the
uh,
results of the elected part of the
Okay.
school board, um, I can't remember the particular numbers, but it was about 50-50 between the alleged charter school faction and the CTU faction with two independents. But they will be offset by the mayor's nominating the remaining part of the board until we have a fully elected school board in a couple more years. Um, I think it remains to be seen how this new group will, first of all, act together or not, and what sort of initiatives they may put forward. They still haven't really resolved their budget crunch. Katy, you were going to say something.
um, I think they better understand that they are on thin ice because it will not take the public of Chicago much to start complaining about an additional layer of bureaucracy if it doesn't actually perform and make positive change in our schools, which need it badly. I must say, the process for us in 49 was completely interesting. Based on the urgings of our younger members, we hurried up our endorsement and came up with Ebony DeBerry early in the process. We did have an open um, setting with two other candidates present. We would have had four, but CPS had already, or Chicago Teachers Union had yanked one of the candidates to, to me, the whole thing reeked of Chicago politics
Yep.
by the end. And because Brandon was acting out in the middle of it, he really put his own candidates, or as was perceived his own candidates, in a pickle. And whether or not he's owned up to that or is behaving better, we shall see. I think the kids are losing still at the moment.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left, and I'm going to throw it to each of you. Take a minute to think, or a couple of seconds to think about one thing that you've observed or aware of or care about that you would like to talk to our listeners and viewers about. So I'm going to go eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And Thom, I'm going to pick you first.
Well, I find myself reliving 2016, where I think I'm going to be focused very much on local rather than national or even international affairs, because I'm not sure what effect we will have on those shifting currents outside our particular region, but I know I can have impact here. I want to quickly plug, because I think it's important this time of year, despite what happened with the election, to celebrate. We're having a party next week. We meaning the Investigative Project on Race and Equity. We're celebrating our first year of operations. We won all sorts of journalism awards this past year, primarily around our police traffic stop series that we did with WBEZ and the Sun Times. We did a wonderful story about seniors. It wasn't a wonderful story, but an in-depth look at seniors having trouble getting home repair loans because, believe it or not, they're in redlined unofficial communities, and they just can't get the appraisals they need to get a bank to give them a loan to fix the roof in the house they've lived in for 35 years. So the Investigative Project in Race and Equity is celebrating this first year of wonderful journalism on November 21st at Monochrome Brewery in Pilsen, and we invite you all to join us for that celebration.
That's great.
Got Kate?
I'm very impressed by that group and how you've just jumped off, Thom. So I hope you do a whole show on that sometime. I find myself also closing in locally. I'm very happy that we have what we have here, which is a practiced, experienced bunch of activists in the 49th Ward of all stripes. We know the nuance that the quote unquote left or progressive wing can consist of. So we're not subject to the kind of stereotypical BS that the media shoves down our throat all the time, just clumping us all together and making us morons. So I'm kind of into saving the planet at this point. So anything that we can do, and I think it would be pretty righteous for a bunch of folks our age, seniors, to descend upon the Capitol in an orderly fashion, having made appointments with our representatives and all of the representatives, and fill the halls with knock on doors and saying, okay, what are you guys doing about this? And, all the other things that are environment killing, which includes making war. Everything's connected when you talk about the earth we stand on. So there's no limit.
Well,
and I would
we're
just
gonna have
encourage folks to look at Third Act, Illinois. We have an active chapter of elders trying to help save the environment for our grandkids. And it's a wonderful group. It's actually part of a national network. And of course, we are all kind of refiguring how we approach these issues with the new regime in place. But we'll
Tell them seniors like to march in warmer weather. So
Yeah.
March or April.
We've come to the end of our time. I do want to talk about two people who passed away. One would be Lou Donaldson, the great sax player. He passed away at 98. And at the end of the show, we'll go over some of his music. And our friend Ella Jenkins, who you can see a lot of times when she visited the Heartland Cafe. If you just type in Ella Jenkins live from the Heartland or go to our YouTube site, there's lots of interviews with her singing. She was wonderful. Our other producer, Lynn Orman, was real close to Ella and was with her almost till the end. I'm sure we'll talk about her more, but we're going to play a little bit of her music as we go to the break, and we'll be back with more live from the Heartland from up here in the 49th Ward in a few moments. So stay tuned.
Miss Mary Mac, all dressed in black, with silver buttons all down her back. We'll ask her mother, for 15 cents to see the elephants jump the fence. Well, they jumped so high, they touched the sky, and they never came back till the 4th of July. Never came back till the 4th of July. Okay, now, Lynn, would you put your camera down? And you come up here and do this, see if you can still...
We're going to bring
She's young,
Lynn
but
Orman
she
up.
may never know. Okay.
She is our one of our
And we used to
producers,
do
and she
this.
does a great job of securing great
Yes,
talent.
Mary Mac. Dressed in black, black, black with silver buttons, buttons, buttons all down her back, back, back. Where'd you ask your mother, mother, for 15 cents, cents to see the elephant, elephant jump the fence, fence, where they jump so high, high, they touch the sky, and they never came back till the 4th of July. You did real well. And another thing we used to do, 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, 4, 5 potato, 6 potato, 7 potato, more. Okay. And then if we sometimes we did it in dialect. 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, 4, 5 potato, 6 potato, 7 potato, more. Gotta get it. All right, so what's happening?
Welcome back, all you citizens of the world, for Live from the Heartland for the week of November 16th. And we are talking with our old friend, Jeff Smith. Jeff has, been a guest on this show a number of times over the years. He's a longtime activist, a progressive activist. He's kind of a thorn in the side to the political establishment. And what I like to share is he's a friend of everything Heartland. He's, besides volunteering with organizations from the local to the global, on issues from neighborhood crime to military spending. He's a veteran of countless political campaigns over many decades, from being a poll watcher to a campaign manager and to being a candidate. He served 4 years as the Illinois Democratic Party committeeman and put in 10 years on the board of the Democratic Party of Evanston. He's taught a course on election law at Loyola University, and I think this may be new, he is currently a confirmed independent. Hello to you, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Nice to see you, Michael. Confirmed independent. I was always a, quote, independent Democrat, and I'm not sure there's room for that in the party anymore. So it was liberating to just look in the mirror one day and say, they don't want me except for maybe my feet and my checks, but nothing above the waist. So, here I am. And it gives me, I feel, a little more relatability to the largest growing segment of the electorate. One of the interesting numbers was that both Kamala and Trump got about 9,000 votes less than they did, than Biden did and Trump did 4 years ago. All the numbers aren't completely in, but I don't think that it's going to change that significantly. So unless there was some unusual surge 4 years ago, and maybe there was, a lot of people just stayed home this round. There was the phrase you heard from the pundits, the double haters. The pollsters were talking about the people who didn't like either candidate before Biden dropped out, and Kamala had a little honeymoon and a month or two where she was ahead, but I think that reverted to the mean, as stock analysts would say. So,
what's your? Because it just popped into my head. What's your take? We're recording a few days before the 16th. The show first goes up on the 15th on Lumpen Radio and on YouTube, and then it's on WLUW on Saturday. I'm just wondering if you have any insights, any hopes around how the House races will turn out, and whether the Republicans are going to get a trifecta here by winning the House, or if we still have a shot at getting the House. I did see Howard Dean on the television last night, and he still was holding out hope for the Democrats getting the House. What's your sense of that, Jeff?
Hope is a positive emotion. Hope is hope. Wishful thinking will only get you so far. I believe in hope. I believe in prayer. I also believe in math. I don't have any particular insights on the outstanding districts, not living in any of them, and I'm not sure that I have talked to anybody who was active in any of those districts in the last week. I think it's mathematically possible, but mathematically unlikely. My hopes would be, I think a lot of Americans, if they had their druthers, would prefer split government because they, again, the double hater effect, and maybe hate's too strong a word, but the agenda, at least it's perceived, of both major parties is not where most Americans are at. And that's partly a function of the primary process. It's hard to get nominated in either party without being, running the gauntlet of a number of litmus tests where you have to take positions that most Americans don't favor.
What's your general take on where we're at? I mean, if I was coming from Mars and I didn't know anything about what's going on, and I say, okay there, Jeff, I hear you know a lot about politics. What's your sense of where the Democrats are at?
Well, if you're coming from Mars and you don't know what's going on, that doesn't disqualify you to vote, and it doesn't disqualify you to hold office, right? As long as you've been naturalized. The Democrats took a licking, if you believe the numbers, and it was a shift across the board, but as somebody pointed out, it wasn't a landslide by normal, what we used to call a landslide. If you have 10 people in a room and 5 people think one way and 5 people think the other, that's not really a landslide. But there was a big enough shift that the Democrats ought to take note. And some of the articles you mentioned, cover it. People have all sorts of explanations. I think the biggest mistake the Democrats would be, or their allies, the left, progressives, would be to blame the people. I mean, we've spent 4 years talking about democracy, democracy, democracy. Saul Alinsky said you got to meet people where they're at, right? So I think it was him. So I think it's time for some soul searching. Brett Stephens, who I'm not always a fan of, had an insightful column on the 22nd of October in the New York Times saying if Kamala loses, this will be why. And then he followed it up with a kind of a name-calling article afterwards, but it's still got some insights now talking about prigs and pontification in the Democratic Party. Jon Stewart was much to the same effect before the election, saying if the Democrats blow it, this will be why. I think a lot of folks feel talked down to, and I use the phrase left, right, and left out. Politics is not just a matter of left and right. The left out are arguably bigger than either the left or the right, and there's a huge chunk of Americans that don't feel that either party is really addressing their needs. And Trump's campaign, to some extent, was more anti-establishment. It's anarchism from the right, if you will, kind of giving a finger to a lot of institutions and norms, and obviously that offends a lot of people. But if people are generally angry, it can be a winner. And we can overanalyze this. We could spend days on this. We can make this a mini series and spend a couple hours every day. But you can start with a couple easy numbers. We had record-breaking numbers of Americans, according to most polls, and they've been asking this question for decades. Is the country headed in the right direction? And record numbers of Americans were saying, no, we're headed in the wrong direction. Now, if you dive into that, people may have a different idea about what's the right direction, but that's never a good sign for the incumbent party. Into that general environment, the Democrats slid in Kamala Harris, who was the person most closely associated with an unpopular president and with the status quo. Until she was elevated to that position, Kamala Harris had the worst favorability ratings of any vice president in modern history. And the one time she tried to campaign on the national stage on her own, it met with a whole lot of success. She was one of the first candidates to drop out in 2020. So you just take that overall picture, and that's, I think, why in one sense she was correct when she said she was the underdog. But people say she didn't have enough time are incorrect, because what the polls showed was that she got a surge of popularity when she became the nominee, was leading in the polls for a while, and then the more that she campaigned and the more that people saw of her and the more that people started to realize what she was running on, it wasn't selling. So the Democrats have a problem. Kamala, to some extent, it's part of it's personal to her, part of it is not personal to her. She was just the person holding the flag that a lot of folks don't want to salute anymore. So that's a problem. And the Democrats really need to figure out where not only are they not reaching folks, but where they might actually be turning folks off as well.
You know, you mentioned the anti-establishment vibe in the country, like giving the finger to the Democrats or the government in this case. I think that's a lot of it, you know, that you got a lot of people who don't pay as much attention to politics as maybe you or I do. And, you know, they've got some problems in their life and they kind of go with this kind of would-be fascist guy rather than people that we have supported, thinking that their life will get better by sticking it to the gov. And I'm just wondering where the Democrats go over the next couple of years, because we do have an election in 2026 where we will probably have an opportunity to maybe take back the House if we don't have it. Who knows what the Senate will be? There's a lot of Senate races coming up then. What's your kind of take on the future and like what the Democrats need to do, and what are some opportunities for us to do workarounds?
Well, we can't I probably shouldn't even use that. It's by force of habit and decades of running as a Democrat, trying to be a Democrat, serving as a Democrat, wearing a Democratic hat. But I don't feel welcome anymore. Okay, and on most issues, I'm probably to the left of most of America on a lot of issues. On some, maybe not, and that's enough to get me disqualified. You know, if a guy who went to 5-6 states for Obama, you know, knocked on doors, got called names for Harold Washington, ran the state of Illinois for George McGovern. If I'm not left enough for the Democratic Party, how are they going to reach somebody in Peatone, Mokina, Tennessee, Kentucky? The Democrats used to have the phrase, the big tent. And that tent doesn't seem so big anymore. It seems like there's an admission price. You get screened. The Democrats scream about book bans, but are probably the heavier enforcers of cancel culture. Why is Dilbert was the funniest strip in the country probably, and I don't believe in cancel culture. I think everybody deserves to be judged by the arc of their entire life. We've all done or said things that are stupid or that we regret. That's the nature of being human. It's one thing if you're chronically evil on some count, but this whole idea, and I think that's just one of a laundry list of things that a lot of little things added up to really grate on the nerves of, I won't say the average American because it's such a big and diverse country, but a lot of Americans, enough to push a number of folks over the edge.
Let me read a quote from Thomas Frank. You remember Thomas Frank? He wrote "What's the Matter with Kansas?"
Yep.
He was on this show maybe 100 years ago. I have a quote from him from the New York Times. My Kansas story was mainly about Republicans, but I also wrote about the way the Democrats were gradually turning away from working people and their concerns. Just think of all those ebullient Democratic proclamations in the 90s about trade and tech and globalization and financial innovation. What a vision they had. All those manifestos about futurific wired workers or the learning class, all those speeches about how Democrats had to leave the worker-centric populism of the 1930s behind them, all those brilliant triangulations and reaching out to the right. When I was young, it seemed that every rising leader in the Democratic Party was making those points. That was the way to win voters and what they called the center, the well-educated suburbanites and computer literate professionals everybody admired. And I'll just add to that, my feeling was we were holding our nose, hoping to win the election, trying not to pay too much attention to all the red, white, and blue balloons, the going for populism, the sticking with Israel, and really not addressing workers' needs. I'm starting to ramble, but maybe you have a comment about that, what I've just read.
Well, yeah, I could write almost a whole book in response to that. And I don't think that I didn't think at the time, and I still don't think there's a whole lot, quote, wrong with Kansas. One of the things that Nancy and I have done over the past 6 years, trying to stay in touch with our grandkids as they grow up faster than, you blink an eye, right? And so we try and get down to Georgia, numerous times a year, and we were driving a lot there. So I've spent about a third of my life over the last 5 years, 6 years, I'd say, not only in Georgia, but getting there by way of Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana. Often stop. I've got family in southern Indiana, and I'm not one of these folks who's going to, not invite somebody over to Thanksgiving because they voted different than me. And I think that's a real destructive attitude. One thing I've said for years is that any change is hardest for those least situated to adapt to change. So almost any policy change, unless it's specifically designed to help those in the worst of circumstances, is going to be disproportionately bad for folks who are living paycheck to paycheck, and that includes cultural change. What we've seen, and this started with you can go back to the 60s in Vietnam, and when there was this repolarization and the hippies were against the war, and the hard hats, wearing a hard hat became a symbol of support of the war, which now called support the troops, and being against what the left stood for. NAFTA reinforced that. The Democrats ceased to be seen as someone who was going to stand up. Globalization was pretty terrible for the Rust Belt and for a lot of folks who used to be able to support a family on a working class salary. But the cultural change that goes along with it, free love, the sexual revolution, recreational drugs. If you've got the money and the support network, the lawyers, the extended family, the counselors and the therapists, to get you out of the worst consequences of a lot of change in cultural mores that we've seen, it's a lot easier to accept, and it's seen as a lot more of a threat if it's hit close to your family and you don't have the means to deal with that. So another thing that's happened is immigration is not thing that I think all of the left thought it would be. I think the polling numbers show that over time, you can't automatically assume that all incoming ethnicities are going to be Democratic constituencies. A lot of the folks coming from Central America, South America, they're either Catholic or they're actually evangelicals, for example. A lot of folks coming from other places on the globe are fleeing what they saw as oppression by, well, it's hard to call Russia communist anymore, but certainly countries that were in the Eastern Bloc, folks that trying to get away from some of the regimes in Asia. They're against totalitarianism. They don't like to be told what to say or think, and they see strength in institutions like church and family, which the Democrats and the left occasionally give lip service to, but you do a little poking and prodding, and there's still a lot of attitude that regards religion as the opiate of the people, and the family as an institutional of patriarchal oppression. So that's not going to win a lot of hearts and minds in Kansas. And I don't think that's the fault of people in Kansas. It's a disconnect that's grown within the body politic.
Jeff, let me ask you a little bit about the role of the Palestine, Gaza, Middle East question. You're a closer follower of Bernie Sanders than I am. I have a great respect for Bernie and like him a lot, and have rooted for him. But he's been pretty critical lately about the party. What would you like to share about that, and maybe the role of Palestine?
You want to make sure I never run for anything ever again, right? It's interesting. I was looking at some polling numbers today, and the Democrats have not had a positive favorability rating in about 9 years. But there was a big drop off for Biden, for Kamala, for the Democratic Party in the spring of this year. And I was like, what was going on in the spring? What was going on in the spring? I think that, and I looked more by subgroups, and there was a huge drop off among young voters. So I think the Democrats failed to distinguish themselves enough from the Republican position. There's been a few real large surges of populism, if you will. What are the biggest marches that we've seen, in the past, 15, 20, 20 years? There was a huge number of people that took to the streets over the invasion of Iraq. Prior to it happening, there was some pretty large climate oriented marches and protests, New York City, around this country. There was, of course, the reaction to Trump's initial election, Pink Hats, Grant Park, and all the rest of it. That last one sort of stuck, but the other two impulses haven't been honored as much. You're in a tough place. People have very strong opinions, and a lot of powerful interests have very divided opinions on the Middle East. But I think that Biden and the Democrats needed to do more, needed to take a stronger stand for human rights, for democracy. If you're campaigning to be, and democracy is one of your big things, and the name of your party is the Democratic Party, but then you kind of got to stand up for that everywhere. You can't put an asterisk, and finger wagging doesn't do a whole lot of effect. People can debate sanctions. Biden had no problem threatening sanctions when Putin was lining up tanks at the Ukraine border. but finger wagging and the threat of sanctions, and then even sanctions didn't stop Putin. With Israel, and understandably, if you're Israel, you're going to retaliate. You're going to take some action to root out those you think want to kill you. But it also appears that Netanyahu now had an excuse after October the 7th to do what a lot of folks on his camp had wanted to do all along. And you look at the pictures, and it's hard to say that it adds up to self-defense. And then we ended up with, anti-Semitism is a scourge. It's horrible, but arguably the Netanyahu regime is one of the biggest drivers of that globally now. So it created a divide. It didn't help the Democratic Party. I think it drove a lot of folks out at the time. They eventually ended up coming. Most of them came back because they saw Trump was going to be even worse. But not all of them did. I think a lot of them just ended up staying home, and that's where it was not a win-win. It was maybe a lose-lose, but you chose kind of the worst of all worlds.
Well, hey, Jeff, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing these thoughts. We're running out of time, but I'll invite you publicly right now to come back on, and we'll talk some more about a number of things we didn't get to touch on. I want to thank everybody who made the show possible. That would be Hal James, our engineer. That would be Katy Hogan and Thom Clark, our producers, along with Lynn Norman. I want to thank Jeff Smith. You are the guest of honor today. And I want to encourage everybody who is out and about on Saturday to stop by the Filmworkers Holiday Market at Cine City, or Scene City, CINE, 2429 West 14th Street. Check out youtube.com/Heartland Media. Last week's discussion with Katy Hogan, Don Rose, Thom Clark, and myself. One of our listeners said, you made more sense about the presidential election results compared to all those overcompensated talking heads on the mainstream news outlets. Congrats to you all. We'll be back next week. We're going to go out with Lou Donaldson, who just passed away, with Blues Walk, and do good in the world. The world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that Jeff does, and all of us do. Together, we will make a difference, whether we're Democrats, independents, or whatever we call ourselves. Over and out.